Hello, welcome back to Education on Fire. I said I was going to be a little bit more relaxed, a cup of tea time, so we're going to do that today. No guest today, just me chatting about our Graus episode 4, which is going to be all about technology. So we just want to make sure that we give you the opportunity to go into that, talk about the whole thing about technology, mobile phones. Any thoughts that you have, let me know. Please put them in the comments, either live here if you're on YouTube, or put them on the replay. Anywhere you'd like, we can have those conversations. And really, thank you so much to everybody who's been in touch over the last few weeks, talking about some of the posts, some of the things we've spoken about here, and some of the things on the podcast itself. Really do appreciate it. It's really just an opportunity for us to kind of come together, have a proper conversation about what we're trying to do within education, obviously based around Professor Dr. Graus's OBE's book through a different lens. All the links to all those sorts of things are in the description below. So if you haven't taken a look at it yet, if you haven't bought it yet, want to find out more, you can just check out through there. If you go to graus.com/the-book, I think the website is, you can take a look through there as well. So yeah, do let me know and keep in touch. Really be delighted to chat for anyone who's here and has anything that they'd like to say while we get through that. I know a lot of people have been interested in terms of the conversation around, should phones be banned completely from schools? Should it be social media? Should it just be 16s and unders? We're going to talk a little bit about that, some of my thoughts, some of the things related to the podcast as well. So yeah, do let me know your thoughts. I'm really interested to hear and get all the perspectives we possibly can. So I hope you've had a good week. I've been teaching drums all day, so my ears are slightly ringing, but not too bad. But it's actually a pleasure to come in and chat to you again. Let me know where you're watching from. Let me know what you've been up to today. Let me know what type of school you're in, or if you're a parent, it's really good to get an idea of how everything fits together, who's taking part in these conversations, who's interested in these things. Be really interested to know what your position is and what your part is within this education world that we're talking about, with children at the heart of it. That's really what we're here to do. So it might be you're an educator, might be a parent, might be a mentor, might be running the club, whatever it happens to be, do let me know. So we'll get into the podcast episode and Graus's episode from Monday just shortly, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to find out that the National Association for Primary Education, of which I am vice chair, I'm not sure I mentioned that very much before, but just so that you're aware of that, they have a conference coming up in association with the University of Bedfordshire, all about reading, as you can see here. Just let me scroll down for you so that you can see all those details. Friday the 8th of May, 9:30 till 4 o'clock. And the way this is going to work is there's going to be a keynote lecture at the beginning, as you can see there, by Professor Roger McDonald. And from that, we're then going to have the opportunity to do, there are 5 workshops on offer. So let me just scroll down and show you those 5 different versions, and you can choose 2 of them. So we're going to have them all available in the morning, all available in the afternoon, and you can pick and choose which ones are going to work best for you, and lunch as well. So if you're free, if you're in the Bedfordshire area, or if you're actually a bit further afield but want to come anyway, please do get in touch. It's only £60 per person, which is such an amazing value. And if you're a NAPE member, it's only £50, so you get that £10 off. So it's great value. If you're a NAPE member, you should have had an email with the promo code, which you can use at checkout. If you want to know more about NAPE, if you want to know more about the speakers, all of that, you can see those websites are on there. So if you go to educationonfire.com/reading, that's the easiest way to start. That'll take you to this page that I'm showing you now. And then you can book, find out more information and everything that you need from there. So yeah, it's the 8th of May with the University of Bedfordshire. And not only are teachers from local schools, of course, going to be there, but we're also doing it as part of the university so that we can actually help support their students as well, who are obviously training, and it'll be towards the end of their year. So it's focused on giving them some real insights from these wonderful workshops and obviously this fantastic keynote lecture, but also the opportunity for them to get an idea of what a conference is all about as well. There'll obviously be some stands, people related to reading there as well. So yeah, do check that out. educationonfire.com/reading will take you there and find out any more. If you've got any questions about anything, you can get in touch as it says there at the bottom of that page, or you're always welcome to get in touch with me through Education on Fire, and I will help you out as best I can. So yeah, I really hope you can join us for that. It's going to be a fantastic day, and it's obviously a really important year, talking about the reading year and it being part of the National Year of Reading, which is obviously 2026. So that was the reason we decided to come on that particular topic. And just on the topic of topics, we're actually already talking to people about next year's conference and some different topics for those as well. And I think it's likely to be in Birmingham, so a little bit further more north in the Midlands there. But yeah, let us know about your thoughts on all of those things. Be delighted to help out. So let's turn our attention to what the Graus Gets Gritty episode 4 season was all about. Yes, it was about technology, and we had some real great insights as to what was important around technology, how we could actually think about it, and Gare didn't go into just lots of different tools, lots of different things. Of course, there's all that out there, but actually talking about it in a broader sense. What's it for? What are we trying to do? How are we trying to support our children? How are we trying to actually lever, I guess, technology, whether it's AI, whether it's the internet, all of those things, and how does that fit in the general conversation that we've had about anything that's been progressive? And he was obviously talking about when fountain pens were changed to ballpoint pens, when we were talking about having calculators and then shouldn't have calculators, and how all these things kind of made a big kind of debate within education as well. And the first thing we should probably do, which came from his quote, was the idea of actually having a total ban on mobile phones. I know that is a stance that some people do think would actually work. Gare was saying that actually the idea of taking these out of school is literally turning around to something obviously our children and we have all the time in our hands, and that we rely on in so many different ways. And not so much that you can't have them, which of course the ban does, but just to sort of pretend that they don't exist. And you would think that within the education world, in terms of what we're trying to help and support our young people with, actually the tools that are available in a way is going to be really, really important from that point of view. And I'm not here to say one way or the other. I think it's just about having these proper conversations about why would we not have mobile phones in school if they're going to be helpful and supportive. And Gare's conversation around this was the fact that as a German teacher, he talked about having pen pals in different schools, and the fact that you'd have to send them off and it'd take weeks to come backwards and forwards. In this day and age, with something like WhatsApp as an example, you could actually have real-time conversations. You could have text messages backwards and forwards. Yes, of course, these things would be set up in the best possible way. And one of the things that he's mentioned, of course, is the fact that, of course, we don't want to put anyone in harm's way. The thought that we need to go above and beyond what we would do normally from a safeguarding point of view is a little bit nonsense. Every teacher, every educator puts everything in place to do that, despite whatever the regulations are, whatever the policies are that are in place to be supportive. We want to make sure that everybody's safe and all these things are helpful and supportive for everyone. But if you take that example of a WhatsApp group, or working with a different school in a different country, or even around the country for that matter, you take the mobile device out of the classroom, that's no longer an option. And then you start to think, well, is that idea of completely banning mobile phones actually a supportive thing? Is it something which is actually realistic? Is it something which is supporting the way we learn or being able to enhance what we have? Or is it actually sort of taking those things away? And as I said before, the idea of this sort of historical pattern, and it's something in terms of calculators and the internet and AI. And it just always makes me think, once upon a time I had to go to a different place, to a library, to find information. The internet comes along, the ability to have everything at your fingertips, or within your school or within your learning establishment, all the way now to having it on a device, or to literally have it on the desk next to you to be able to do that. That's the way we all work. And it just seems that would be an obvious step to actually, yes, put things in place which we need to do, but the ability to adapt, the ability to kind of make what we're trying to do as supportive as possible. It doesn't dumb anything down. It's not changing standards. It's just being a realistic conversation about what we're trying to do in terms of learning. If you think back 100 odd years when education was there for everybody, the reading and writing Learning maths was important in terms of just supporting the social mobility, the understanding what people needed in the workforce to actually help people educate themselves. Technology is just really the latest version of all of that. And I think that's something to really sort of hang on to from a starting point. And I think, yeah, it's a really important factor, a really important thing that we should sort of be aware of when we're sort of kicking this conversation off. So the next step, it's not the technology, it's the human behavior. Interested to see what you think about that. I do love that comment that really, what's happening? My mobile phone, it's actually on my desk just here. It's not doing anything. It's not making any noises. It's not actually going onto the internet. It's not doing anything. It's actually more about what I do with it. Do I want to interact with it? Do I not want to interact with it? How do we want our behaviours to put in? And this idea of digital citizenship, the idea of how we interact with people, how we want to come across, how we want our digital footprint to look. These are important conversations because we know there are many employers, going back through social media posts and all those things. Without those conversations, all we're doing is talking about it. We're not actually being part of it. You wouldn't be teaching writing without having a pencil and a piece of paper. You wouldn't be doing maths without actually doing maths. If you were doing science without making any experiments, if you were doing PE without actually kicking a ball or throwing a ball or whatever the sport happened to be, it becomes a little bit nonsensical if it's that kind of, we're going to talk about technology, but we're going to actually remove the actual technology away from what it is that we're doing. So understanding is about what we put in place and why we put these things in place is kind of a really, really important thing. And I did love the fact that he talked about students being partners in creating these policies. I mean, I haven't actually seen anything in the media, I don't think, actually talking to young people, asking them what they think. It's all about policymakers, it's about educators, it's schools. I'm not sure I've seen anyone actually saying to any students, any young people, what do you think about banning mobile phones in schools? I'd be really interested to know. And I'm not saying that hasn't happened, it's just that I haven't come across it, or certainly in a way that I'd be able to sort of report back on that. And I really like the fact that Gare was sort of saying that these conversations are important because they are about the future solutions of what it is that we're trying to be able to put in place. And so children want to be safe. They don't want to put themselves in harm's way. But as older people, as the adults in there, not having that conversation to turn around and say, what do you think? How do you use these things? Let's say, for argument's sake, that social media, as we know it, all the main platforms, the algorithms, we know they're not necessarily supportive. We know that some of the content that gets pushed in the directions is not very helpful. So therefore, how can we mitigate that? We could actually have that there are certain parts of social media that are banned. It could be that surely there's a technology company out there that can actually provide an alternative. Why is there someone not coming and saying that this is a supportive, helpful version that people can hang out and actually be a positive, safe area? How do we go about that? I don't know. But those people that came up with all this amazing technology that's out there that we all use every day must also be the brilliant people that could come up with a different alternative. I saw recently there was an organisation that's coming up with a news channel just for young people. What a great idea. I saw someone talking about the idea of the old-fashioned phone brick, how you sort of gauge the difference between, having a mobile device in order just for text messages or the ability to phone home or to have certain important things on it that's not necessarily connected in a way that's going to be harmful if you take that in its sort of general way. And I know there are apps you can put on the phone as well as sort of different devices that do that, but they're not being talked about in the same way as people are talking about, right, let's ban phones, let's ban social media, let's do all these things. I think there's a bigger conversation there, and I think getting involved in the grey and understanding why and what and how that actually has an effect on people is important. I think back to my days at school, there were some people who didn't have a television at home. And so if we start banning some people from using certain things and some people from using other things, you start to get this world where actually fitting into your peer group becomes an issue. Not understanding what's happening in the culture around you. You can argue the positives and the negatives about those, but without having those conversations, how do you know what's going to be working and what isn't working? And someone actually said the idea of this sort of changing the idea of sort of equity and democratization. You know, we do have the opportunity for everybody to have access to some amazing things. But having access to all those things doesn't help if you haven't got a device or you can't get online. And also it doesn't help if you don't have the educational know-how, the skills, or the practical understanding of how you go about finding the important information, how you have the critical thinking that you need to make the most of all of these things. So access is certainly an important part of it, but also how you use that. So if you take the technology out of the school, let's take AI as an example. If everything you do is based on writing things down and doing pen and paper, and you're not actually in a position where you're going to be using AI to help create a piece of work, to reframe a piece of work, to be able to create a graphic, to be able to create a piece of music, something which you wouldn't be able to do unless you were taught those skills in a safe way, in a way that's supportive to maybe a project that you're doing or some kind of group activity, then you can do it in such a way where you get the benefit of both worlds. And that isn't to say that we shouldn't use pen and paper. I've got my run of show here. And yeah, here we are. Look, you can see I write everything down. My run of show, the things related to what I'm doing. I like that ability to be able to, yes, we're going to make this physical. We want to be able to see what it is that I'm doing. I want to have it tactile. I want to be able to write these things down and actually give me the things that I need. And actually maybe I'll do this next time, have a camera behind me. There's an absolute myriad here of monitors and lights and cameras and all sorts of stuff in order to be able to put on a show like this on YouTube and basically be your own production studio. Wouldn't be able to do any of this without that knowledge or those conversations going forward. But I still like the pen and paper. And I think it's not always a this or that. It's actually how does it fit in different ways for different people in ways that you want to do it. And finally, this idea of young people are our role models in technology. I certainly know my kids know much more about these things than I do. And as I said, as someone who actually has an online show who's using technology all the time to record podcasts, create videos, I'm using a lot of this stuff. But even then, there's various things within the technology world, within using your mobile phone, that my kids know. And it's just inherent. It's just something they talk about, they're just using all the time, that I don't know about. And so I think having that two-way conversation, actually being able to get them to show us what's important to them, why they use it, how they use it. And then if we do need to make these changing rules of how things are going to be more supportive, it comes from a place of understanding and knowledge of what's important to them, how it works, and why we should listen. And that hopefully builds up a new norm. And I think that's probably the most important thing, not a one size fits all. So I think one of the things I wanted to take from that in terms of that perspective, and this came from my conversation with Gare on that episode number 4, was he talked to the idea of the car. And when cars first came in, you had someone walking in front of the car to make sure that the people realised something was going to come which was dangerous. They weren't aware of what that was, and it seems ridiculous now, but it was just to make sure that everyone was safe, and they created a space for this new car to come down the road. Why? Because there were loads of pedestrians everywhere. You had horse and carts, you had other things which obviously were more popular, and there were more of those things around. But what happened? How did these things develop? Well, first of all, we started having things like pavements. We started having, rules that you had to obey as part of these things as we have more and more cars on the road. If you think about what we do now, does a child interact with a car? I would say almost certainly from the moment they're born, and they're probably maybe even going home from hospital, they're going to be in a car. Are they just thrown in the back? Are they thrown in the back seat? No, we have things like seat belts. Cars were really dangerous years and years and years ago. Now they can still be dangerous, but in order to make them safe, we've had these conversations. There's been legislation brought in, seat belts, crash things that happen when cars hit each other, that whole kind of research in technology that goes into actually making people safe if there is a problem. And I think the same thing applies in terms of the technology. It's kind of, we want things to be as safe as possible. We don't let children drive here in the UK until they're 17. That doesn't mean to say that they're not in a car. They've been in a child seat, they're on a booster seat, they're in a normal seat belt. They watch how people drive, they're aware of what goes on around them, they watch their parents drive, they watch adults as part of that. And then at what's deemed to be age appropriate, they then take the wheel, literally But then what happens? We don't just let them go out on their own. You have driving lessons, you have to pass the test, you have to have a theory test. There are reasons all these things are in place. And I think we can use that same idea in terms of having phones in schools. What is the right age? Is it 13? Is it 16? Is it actually having access to it, but not your own device? Is it the ability to understand that maybe these devices are being used at home anyway? All of these things come really, really important. But at some point, there's someone actually helping, supporting, teaching you. There's a test involved, which seems to be an important factor to say, we understand at this point, you know enough about what's going on, and you have the capable skills to drive a car, which is an important thing. Away you go. And even at that point, insurance is really expensive. It becomes prohibitive to some people, but how did they manage to go and change that as an option? Then they had things like a black box. So those people that wanted to be safe, they were being supported to drive safe. The insurance premiums come down. Why can't we apply some of these sort of bigger ideas into the conversation around devices and mobile phones? How is it that we can't actually, if we had a mobile phone in school, have these conversations? Let's learn some of the apps together that we need to learn, the ones that we want to be aware of, the ones that we don't want to use, develop apps which are very child-centric. But at some point, we have to let children have their own devices to do that, even if it's not until 18, when you sort of become an adult and you have to take it forward. But even before that, you want to sort of have these proper conversations, understand how these things work, and actually take them through all the versions as best we can. But as we said, them showing us the way in terms of the world that they've been brought up in the world that they understand and what they're doing. Because at that point, it becomes a much more area. I think the runway is a little bit longer. It gives us the opportunity to be able to bring everything together. And I think at that point, everybody's safer because everyone's taking responsibility for themselves. If we go back to the car analogy, what's going on? You've still got the person who's going to drive at 100 odd miles an hour on the motorway. That's not okay. It's not safe, but it still happens. That doesn't mean to say that we stop people from driving. It just means that we support people that want to obey the rules in a way that we deem to be safer. How do we do that in a technical way? How do we do that in a technology way within school, out of school? And I think the conversation is the most important thing that we can do from that. So, as always, if you want to join in the conversation, use that hashtag Education on Fire, either within the social media post that you're doing anyway, or certainly if you're going to post on this Education on Fire YouTube channel, if you're going to do it personally to me on LinkedIn, do let me know. How much do you think students should be partners? How much should we as adults be making these policies? How much of it do you think is the technology? How much do you think of it is human behavior? And if it is going to be human behavior, how do we change that? Is it just about one size fits all, or actually is it more about those conversations? I suspect it's a combination of all of these things as we go back to the idea of driving a car as well. And how much of it is actually that historical sense? We have the opportunity to do things differently. Did having a calculator in school completely stop people from learning how to do maths? Did actually using the ballpoint pen change the writing? And one of the things Gare says from that point of view is that actually it helped left-handers who had to go across and, go across their work all the time, smudge those things, actually became better. Actually, did it make things bad or worse in a different way? I think the answer was that may well have been the case, because actually you could write faster. Handwriting wasn't necessarily as easy. In terms of people wanting to do it faster, so therefore you have to take even more care about what you're writing down. Gare said he's gone back now to the fountain pen because you like the art of it, the taking the time, the thinking about it. And that isn't to say that we don't communicate via messaging. It doesn't mean to say we don't communicate by email, because that's the way the world works. But as I said, even with my run of show pad here, I want to write those things down, but I'm also in a digital age where we do things in a digital email format. So all of these things are important. So it's not really about what is it that we are doing, what should we do, how do we do it. It's actually about, should we give every child a device in school? Should they have a device in school? I think the answer is probably, well, maybe, if the circumstances are right. And also maybe it's a contextual thing as well. Yes, it's absolutely year 9, secondary school. not primary school. Or yes, primary school, getting ready to go to secondary school. Yes, at any age, as long as there's actually proper guidance about where the device is, where it lives, if it's on the person, if it's in a place. We don't spend all of our, we don't have our books on the back of our chairs all the time, or our bags or our coats on the back of the chairs all the time. We have somewhere that we would put it, or somewhere we would have it, whether it's in a locker. But actually giving responsibility and having those conversations are really, really important. So, as I said, let me know what you think. I'm really, really keen to see whether there's a divide within countries, whether there's a divide within schools, areas, whatever that happens to be. Let's have the conversation. That's really what we're here to do, is to sort of have those conversations. Remember, there's the hashtag education on fire. Really, really thanks so much for listening from that point of view. Now, just before I go, a couple of things I wanted to remind you of. The first was we talked about John Coe and NAPE in terms of that primary first publication. Do check that out. educationonfire.com/NAPE takes you to this page. As there are 3 of those digital primary first journals there. They're fantastic. And also, a couple of other things there. The coaster in and the mug. All this stuff goes obviously to the charity, and anything we can do to support charity that's actually supporting children from birth to 13. That's why I got involved in it. And as I said before, Education on Fire wouldn't exist without their continual support. So that idea of doing things for the right reasons and actually supporting the people that can really make a difference, really, really important. And my final thing, I mentioned Ed when I went to bet the other day. Empathy Week is coming up 9th to the 13th of March. I'll leave this here just for a second while I take another mouthful of tea. Do use the QR code there. That will take you to the website where you can get more details going through. I think I saw something on social media today that said there was something like 600,000 students already taking part. Maybe I got that wrong, but I think it was something amazing. I'm sure Ed will let me know if that's wrong, but I'll leave it there just for a second for you to scan that QR code. So yeah, thank you so much for joining me. I really do appreciate it. Just leave you with that reading conference page from Friday the 8th of May. Website's there for you to get to that page and find out more information. Thank you so much indeed. Look forward to speaking to you again, and we'll be back very, very soon. See you, Faye. Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire.